Hi, welcome to the protein section for Introduction to Nutrition 2. So we're talking about proteins today. Proteins are made up of amino acids. And there are many different ways to categorize amino acids, but probably the most nutritionally relevant way has to do with whether or not they are essential or non-essential amino acids. And another word for essential amino acid is an indispensable amino acid. And we'll see it some way this way written in the literature. An essential amino acid is any amino acid which our bodies cannot synthesize. So we can't make them ourselves endogenously, and so we have to consume them exogenously from our food. And there are 9 essential amino acids that we cannot make endogenously. And we're going to look at that in a second. A non-essential or dispensable amino acid is any amino acid that we can assemble endogenously from other substrates. Then we have conditionally essential or conditionally indispensable amino acids. And these are amino acids which are not essential in most people, but depending on certain physiological conditions that exist, like metabolic disorders caused by different diseases or genetic mutation, um, these amino acids become essential amino acids. So up here we have our essential amino acids. There's 9 of them. They are phenylalanine, valine, threonine, methionine, tryptophan, histidine, isoleucine, leucine, and lysine. And these are the amino acids that we have to get from our foods because we cannot synthesize them in our bodies. Down here, we have our conditionally indispensable amino acids and their precursors. So phenylalanine is the precursor to tyrosine. Methionine and serine are the precursor to cysteine. Glutamate is the precursor to proline. Glutamine, glutamate, or aspartate are precursors to arginine. And glutamate or ammonia are precursors to glutamine. Now, what causes these amino acids to become conditionally essential are things like organ failure, prematurity. So neonates have conditionally essential amino acids, genetic disorders that prevent the conversion of one amino acid into one of our conditionally essential amino acids. These can all keep our body from making the precursors or the enzymes necessary to synthesize some otherwise non-essential amino acid. So for example, premature infants, because their organs are not very well developed, cannot synthesize cysteine, proline, or arginine. Liver disease impairs the production of cysteine and tyrosine. Children born with phenylketonuria lack the enzyme necessary to convert phenylalanine to tyrosine. So tyrosine is a conditionally essential amino acid for these children, and actually phenylalanine needs to be limited because it can build up in their system and become toxic. Now, as far as sources of amino acids, we have great sources from both animal and plants. Animal products, such as meats, poultry, fish, eggs, cheese, and dairy, are all good sources of amino acids. And these are actually complete in the sense that they have all 9 essential amino acids. Now, some of the higher fat dairies we don't really consider as a source of amino acids. It's not that there aren't any amino acids in there. It's just that it's mostly a vehicle for fat. And so we don't usually recommend those as sources of amino acids. But that would be like butter, sour cream, and cream cheese. Now, we do have plant sources of amino acids like grains and grain products, legumes, and vegetables. And the thing about plant-based sources is that there are very few plant-based sources that contain adequate amounts of all 9 essential amino acids in one product. But a really simple rule of thumb to make sure that you're getting all 9 is to combine grain products with legumes. So anytime you combine beans with rice, or seitan, which is a wheat-based product, with tofu, you're going to get a complete protein in the sense that all 9 essential amino acids will be there in high amounts. And this is actually a very healthy protein if you think about it, because this protein does not come with a lot of the cholesterol and saturated fat that we see in the animal products. It really just comes with a lot of fiber and a lot of nutrients. Now, another source of amino acids are those that we produce endogenously. So our desquamated mucosal cells represent about 50 grams a day. Also, we produce all these digestive enzymes in order to digest our food and glycoproteins, and all of this is a protein source. And so used up digestive enzymes and glycoproteins represent about 17 grams per day. Now, I'm being asked to teach you nitrogen balance, and I think that I'm teaching this because this is on the USMLE. Nitrogen balance is very problematic as far as what it can actually tell you, especially in a hospital setting. And we're going to talk about why that is in a second. But first, let me just teach you what it is and how to use it. So nitrogen balance is a way that we use to determine if the amount of protein consumed is enough to meet the current needs of your body. And the way that we're looking at that is we're looking at how much nitrogen you're taking in, and we're comparing that to how much nitrogen you're losing. And if you're losing more nitrogen than you're taking in, then you need to be taking in more protein, in a world where nitrogen balance is an accurate method to determine that. And there are very few worlds where it is. But so, nitrogen is a main component of protein, just if that isn't clear. And so that's why we're using nitrogen balance to look at our protein intake and measure that against our protein output in the form of nitrogen. So what we do is we determine how much nitrogen we're losing in the urine over 24 hours. And so this is a 24-hour urinary urea nitrogen test. And that gives us a value for how much nitrogen we're losing through the urine. Now, we do have other sources of nitrogen loss that are not through the urine, things like sweat, for example, or nitrogen that we lose through the feces. And so to account for that, we take the value that we determine in step 1 here, and we add to that we add 4 to that, and that accounts for what we're losing for the sweat and the feces. So now we have a number that is an estimation of total nitrogen lost. And so we have to look at how much nitrogen we're taking in. And so we look at how many grams of protein we're taking in, and we divide that by 6.25. And that gives us the amount of nitrogen that we are taking in through our foods. Then to get nitrogen balance, it's as simple as taking the value of our nitrogen intake and subtracting that from the nitrogen that we're losing in urine and sweat and feces. And that gives us our nitrogen balance. If that number is positive, that means that we are taking in more than we're losing, and we have a positive, good nitrogen balance. If that number is negative, then that tells us that we are actually short on our protein. So let's take a look at that in practice. So let's say that you're taking in 90 grams of protein, and your protein output was, you had a 24-hour urinary urea nitrogen test that showed 20 grams of nitrogen. Okay, now we added 4 to that to account for sweat and feces, and so our total output of nitrogen is 24 grams. Now, we have to get our protein into nitrogen so that we can compare this. So we look at our nitrogen intake. That's 90 grams of protein. We're going to divide that by 6.25, and that gives us 14.4 grams of nitrogen. So now we take the grams of nitrogen that we're taking in and we subtract it from the nitrogen that we are putting out. So that's 14.4 minus 24, and our nitrogen balance, we're in a negative balance. So that's a negative 9.6 grams of nitrogen. And this is, again, all over 24 hours. So this is how much we've lost in this is our negative balance over 24 hours. So this person is losing 9.6 times 6.25, which is 60 grams of protein per day. So basically we're taking the amount of nitrogen we're short, and we're going to get that nitrogen back into an amount of protein. So instead of dividing by 6.25, we're multiplying by 6.25, and that gives us 60 grams of protein per day. And so theoretically, they would have needed 60 more grams that day to be in positive nitrogen balance. Theoretically. I'm going to show you in a second why that's kind of bogus. But so what sort of things could cause a negative nitrogen balance? And again, this is stuff you need to know for your USMLE. So protein malnutrition, right? So if your intake is not enough of protein, you're going to be in a negative nitrogen balance. If you have an essential amino acid deficiency, starvation is going to put you in a negative nitrogen balance. Uncontrolled diabetes will put you in a negative nitrogen balance. Infection will put you in a negative nitrogen balance. Essentially, any condition that decreases the protein absorbed or taken in through the GI tract, or any condition that increases protein wasting and catabolism can put you into a negative nitrogen balance. What causes a positive nitrogen balance? Growth is going to put you into a positive nitrogen balance. Pregnancy is going to put you into a positive nitrogen balance. But also convalescence. Anytime you're recovering from surgery, because you're shifting from a place of negativity to positivity, that's going to put you into a positive nitrogen balance. Recovery from any situation associated with a negative nitrogen balance will put you in to a positive nitrogen balance. Now, again, we find a situation where we would love for nitrogen balance to be really, really informative, but it's not. We're dying to know how much protein does this person need, and it would be great if we had a tool that could tell us that, but we just don't. We really don't, and nitrogen balance is not an answer. The reason that nitrogen balance is not an answer is because nitrogen balance is a steady state technique. And what this means is that changes in protein intake, like if I go from eating a lower amount of protein to a higher amount of protein, that is not going to affect my nitrogen balance for about 9 to 12 days. It takes 9 to 12 days to register as a change in nitrogen balance, and that's in healthy individuals with a steady intake of protein. Okay? In those 9 to 12 days, you're feeding them more, right? But it hasn't affected their nitrogen output yet. So nitrogen balance is going to appear to be positive, but this is just an artifact of the fact that you're feeding them more and you haven't gotten through the adjustment period. After the adjustment period, what we know from studies is that the body responds to the new pattern of intake, and the nitrogen balance will start to drop again. So nitrogen balance in 9 to 12 days is really not that, in the first 9 to 12 days is really not going to be that informative. And ideally after about 12 days, hopefully they're on their way out of the ICU. Now another major problem with nitrogen balance is that even with nitrogen intake in a steady state, we have daily intra-individual fluctuation. Okay, so any one person has a massive fluctuation. And this fluctuation is so large, the standard deviation is so large, so as to make any single measurement really useless. So you would really need to be measuring nitrogen for about 12 days. So 12 24-hour urinary urea nitrogen tests. Before you would really have something useful, and then it would only be useful in healthy people whose intake was kept steady the entire time. All right, these were in healthy people. And notice a few things here. We've known this since 1933. Okay, we've known this for about 82 years. So if you're wondering why you haven't read much about it, being a problem, it's because this was put to bed a long time ago. So these studies were in healthy individuals with a predictable intake. Critically ill patients, you don't know what they were eating beforehand, and a lot of them arrive fasted. Their needs likely fluctuate according to their illness, which goes up and down throughout their course. And then our ability to feed them changes. You'll have one day where, their gut is hypoperfused and you can't get the food in. And then another day where they're feeding like a champ. So they're going to be all over the place. So their variability is going to be even higher than the healthy individuals. And we know that in the healthy individuals, it takes 9 to 12 days before the readings are even meaningful. So it's very unlikely that a few days of nitrogen balance measurements can shed any light on their protein needs. But you do need to know how to do nitrogen balance for your tests, and so that's why I'm teaching it to you. Okay, that's what we have on proteins. Thank you.